Well, this is not what I ordered, but I guess we'll make it work, won't we? So I saw a deal for a cheap €50 computer and I bought it. I thought I was getting a tiny desktop like the tiny desktop I bought before because, that's what it looked like. Turns out that what I had actually bought was this refurbished old school desktop that I remember seeing at various education places around my teens and early 20s. I was gonna turn this into an emulation machine, but it's not gonna fit in my TV setup, obviously. So instead we're gonna make a sequel to my low spec gaming laptop video. Because it almost has the same specs, 4 gigs of RAM, nondescript onboard Intel integrated 4000 GPU, some i3 CPU thing, etc. So let's find out if you can play some old school games on an old school PC. See what I fucking did there. Before we're gonna get to any game playing, we need to make this machine Randolph ready. That means giving it a name, replacing the HDD with an SSD and installing GOG Galaxy on it. For the name, I think I'm gonna copy the Greenham gaming method and picking a fantasy location and naming all my rigs after towns in that fantasy location. The obvious setting would be Fallout New Vegas, but I think I'm gonna go with my homeland of Skyrim instead. So let's call this computer Mothal. He's old, unassuming, but really interesting, and he hides a secret. Installing the SSD of course consisted of failing to clone the drives multiple times and then doing something random and having it work because, that's just how I roll. Then we of course install GOG Galaxy and then we get to installing some games, and not just any ordinary games, no. We're gonna install games suggested by the viewers that commented on the last low spec gaming video. To start off, let's go with my brother from a Swedish mother, Benjamin, and his suggestions of Metro Last Light and GoldenEye Source. I've been curious about Metro ever since Benjamin suggested it in the low spec gaming video where I showcased my laptop. I initially thought that it would never be able to run it, but then I thought, well, maybe. Metro Last Light is, after all, a sequel game, and unlike the original release of Metro 2033, it's not terribly optimized actually. I booted up on Mothal and the initial results were not pretty. The cutscenes ran at a log 30 FPS most of the time, but gameplay ran at 4. And curiously enough, there were no player models in the game at all. Everyone was just an invisible person with just a hat and a backpack on. After bumping all the settings from highest to lowest, we achieved an FPS ranging from 18 to 22, and while that is too low, Mothal is a bit lower spec than the laptop, having an i3 inside him instead of an i5, so I think maybe, just maybe, that Benjamin was correct in assuming that the laptop could pull it off. I guess we might find out in another video down the line. GoldenEye Source is it's a fun update of the N64 classic. It ran a little better, giving us a frame rate ranging from 30 to 45, but there's something about that Source mod jank. It felt like it should run better, and I played an hour of regular Half-Life 2 to check, and here I got frame rates between 60 and 130, only dipping to 20 on one occasion when the headcrab shells were dropped, and staying in the 60 to 70 area during the game's most intense moments like the vehicle sections. So GoldenEye could definitely use some optimization, but it's almost like it's in the spirit of the original game, isn't it? It was fun duking it out in these updated and very pretty versions of the old favorites. It was fun duking it out in these updated and very pretty versions of old favorites, and the soundtrack was spot on. Johnny Paruka, I'm sure I've pronounced that wrong, suggested the two first Gothics and the first two Fallout, and what great suggestions, because they are games that can be played at the same time. Gothic is infamously a keyboard first game and expects you to move the player character with the arrow keys and interact using control space, etc. And the first Fallouts can be played with just a mouse, so you could in theory play Gothic with your left hand and Fallout with your right. It would be dumb and frustrating, but you can. Johnny commented that the games will run on a toaster, and I will agree with the Fallouts, as I saw frame rates ranging from 60 to 250. But the Gothics, I'm not so sure. They are old, but they are also poorly optimized, and Gothic 1 couldn't even recognize the onboard chipset in Morthal, so the game was running in software mode the entire time and outputting a less than desirable 10 to 30 FPS, staying closer to 10 than 30 most of the time. Gothic 2 ran smoother but was plagued with a host of other issues, and that was when it would even run. I'm sure there are patches and workarounds out there, and I would definitely sit down at some point and get them working proper, because Gothic is a lot of fun and the controls are actually really good when you get used to them. Speaking of names I butcher, Stefan commented that King of Dragon Pass and FTL are great low-spec games, and I couldn't agree more. Not too familiar with King of Dragon Pass, and it's not really my thing. But the gist of it is that it's a bit of a strategy game, it's a bit of a choose-your-own adventure game, and it's a bit of a city builder. You rule over a clan that moves into the titular Dragon Pass, and there you must oversee the construction of new building, the recruitment of villagers and soldiers, and you have to forge relationship with the other clans in the area and, well, maybe even fight them. It's a great mouse and beer game, and it's very chill. Like, I like it a lot. Like, you're just sitting there, making decisions, choosing who gets to marry who, and then you can have a beer on the other hand. And you can just chill for like an evening. It's a little bit like playing Heroes but solo. It's in stark contrast to FTL, which is Stefan's other pick. FTL is a roguelike and it's extremely anxiety-inducing, and it requires full control of both mouse and keyboard to succeed. You take control of a ship and a starting crew of 3. You use that crew to jump to other planets, and at those planets events happen. They can be sending the crew into an abandoned space station and risking losing some of them, or they can be aliens wanting to trade, or the most frequent and the showstopper of the game, fighting other ships. It's during these sections that the full control of mouse and keyboard really comes into play. Every system on the ship is mapped to a key binding, and you need to master those key bindings to win against the other ships. It's a game that requires your absolute A-game, and like King of Dragon Pass, it runs at a locked 60 butter smooth FPS. and it's a joy to play on even the tiniest and the most meekest of systems, including Morthal. No subscriber ID, one from the Balkans, had a few favorites as well, and out of the pool of picks I had Thief 3 and a couple of the Hitman games on GOG. Thief 3 ran smooth right out of the box, giving us a decent 50 to 70 FPS even in the more open world portions of the maps. However, with the Hitman games, we ran into a bit of a snag. Something about these lesser known and lesser mainstream quote-unquote titles, they have a tiny bit of incompatibility with the chipset that Morthal is running on. Hitman Contracts uses a filter, and boy did Morthal not like that filter, refusing to run at anything above 30 and consistently staying at 23 even in the main menu. However, with it off, we saw an average of 60 FPS, only dipping to around 30 in the outdoor section of the Meat Butcher nightclub level. The issue with the filter continued in Blood Money, and that combined with some effects that couldn't be turned off and a more beautiful game in general, meant that we only got 24 FPS, and that's just not good enough. Luckily for ID1 selection, we were not just limited to the games I had on GOG, as I happen to have the first two Age of Empires games in my physical collection, and as you might imagine, they run absolutely flawlessly at a capped 60 FPS to, well, no one's surprise. Like literally, these games don't even require a graphics card. Speaking of no surprises, Walter made a big list of games with workarounds and fan patches, and out of the bunch he suggested, I have Ox Vitalis and Alien vs Predator 2000. AVP 2000 stayed at rock hard 60 the entire time I played it, and I think it's kept at that to ensure that a too high frame rate doesn't make it do weird stuff. I thought Ox would run good as well, especially with the Libertatis patch installed and the nature of the game. But for reasons beyond me, Ox was mostly comfortable staying at an unbearable 23, dipping as low as 8 sometimes and only going as high as 30. It's a shame because Ox is fantastic. For those unaware, it's a deep dive RPG set in a fantasy post-apocalyptic world. The sun has started to fade a generation or so ago, and humanity united briefly with the other fantasy races to convert an old dwarven mine into a livable space, and they live there now, underground, because the surface world is completely uninhabitable. You play as some person who must stop the titular Ox from getting destroyed by a demon or something because, well, someone dug too deep. And you do that by traveling the various floors of Ox, completing quests, solving puzzles, and battling monsters. What sets Ox apart is that the gameplay is very physical. You can physically move objects around in the world, and you must physically interact with puzzles to solve them, like placing a lever into a hole and pulling it. Finding a rope and putting it into the gears of an elevator so that it will elevate. that sort of thing. There's this immense level of interactivity that you don't really find in any other game, and it's a bit of a shame that Arcane never went back to the Arx universe and made a sequel. Kind of like how it's a shame that it runs so poorly on Morthal. Generally, I've been a bit confused about how things have run. Metro Last Light, a 2014 knockout out of a game, ran at 20-ish FPS. Gothic 1, a 2001 game, also ran at a similar frame rate, and so did Arx Fatalis, a 2002 game. On the flip side, the games that came out after, like GoldenEye Source, Hitman 3 and Thief 3, ran at 30 to 60, and Half-Life 2 even went as far as 130. So not really knowing what to make of it, I decided to throw a Randolph gauntlet at it just to see how it performed compared to my other PCs, and the results were interesting. You would think that throwing Elder Scrolls games at it and SWAT 4, that Morrowind and SWAT 4 would perform the same, because Morrowind is older, but it's also an open world RPG. Well, they didn't. Morrowind hovered at 20 FPS until I cranked all of the graphics down. And SWAT 4 at max settings gave me a solid 70 FPS, even in the game's most intense moments. With Oblivion and New Vegas, you would think that the 4-year-older and better made fantasy RPG would perform significantly better than the Rush 2010 post-apocalyptic adventure. I know I thought that, and I was wrong. Oblivion, at its absolute minimum settings with everything but the Fates cranked completely down, gave us a 30 to 60 range of FPS, while New Vegas at a higher resolution and better graphical settings gave us an almost solid 30 to 60 FPS in the overworld, and an FPS that hovered around 60 constantly when inside buildings. I don't know what to make of this little computer. The old school PC seems like it's trapped in a bit of a weird place. Its i3 CPU and its Intel integrated 4000 graphics are more suited towards early 2000s gaming, but its Windows 10 OS keeps it from running a lot of the games that it would be right at home running, and I'm stuck running the updated GOG ports for the most part, and they just aren't playing along with this system. But that's not really an issue, because while I was playing games, I pondered the question, what can I use this computer that's bad at playing games but snappy in programs for? And well, use it of course as the controller for my main printer. I've actually been looking for a computer to hook up to my main printer, and I think in a weird way that was why I bought the computer without completely knowing it. So it will be right at home there. But that's about it for me. As you can hear, I have a bit of a cold to nurse, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.